She flew from Italy and insulted my cooking in my own home, so I finally snapped and kicked her out. She walked into my house, looked around, and the very first thing out of her mouth was that my home smelled bad. Not hello. Not thank you for hosting me. Not wow, something smells interesting. Bad. She said it smelled bad. And this woman had been living under my roof, eating my food, and spending my money for an entire week at that point. Let that sink in for just a second, because I need you to really feel the audacity of that moment before we go any further. So here is the full picture. Our narrator today is a woman living in Melbourne, Australia, with her husband. His close friend flies in all the way from Bellagio, Italy, for a visit. Now this is not a young traveler backpacking through Asia with an open mind and a sense of adventure. This is a 60-year-old woman who has left Italy exactly one time in her adult life, and that single trip was to Germany over 25 years ago. So when this woman boards that plane to Australia, she is not arriving with curiosity. She is arriving with a very fixed set of beliefs about how the world should work, and specifically about how food should taste, and even more specifically about how coffee should be ordered. You can imagine what the flight was probably like for her. Hours in a pressurized cabin, eating food that was not Italian, surrounded by people who were not Italian, hurtling toward a country that was deeply, fundamentally not Italy. And instead of seeing that as an adventure, she appears to have seen it as an endurance test. Something to be survived rather than embraced. From the very first day, the complaints start rolling in. Our narrator and her husband take this woman out to restaurants. They want to show her Melbourne, one of the most genuinely diverse and celebrated food cities on the entire planet. Melbourne has earned its reputation over decades of immigration and cultural blending and genuine culinary passion. The food scene there is extraordinary, with incredible sushi, stunning Thai cuisine, rich and complex Chinese restaurants, and yes, also some genuinely excellent Italian food. But none of that matters to this guest. Sushi? No. Thai food? No. Chinese? Absolutely not. Because according to her, Italian food is simply the best, and that is the end of the conversation. There is no curiosity behind her eyes when she looks at a menu. There is only assessment, and the assessment is always the same. This is not what I know, and therefore this is not good. So they go out for Italian. Fine. That is a reasonable compromise. Except it is not fine at all, because even the Italian food is wrong. The pasta is not right. The cheese is not right. The wine is not good enough. And I want you to stop and think about what it actually takes to be that relentlessly dissatisfied. You have been flown to another continent, taken to multiple restaurants, your hosts are trying visibly and genuinely to make you comfortable, and you cannot find a single kind word for anything on the table. That is not a preference. That is a personality. It is the personality of someone who has mistaken familiarity for quality, and who has spent so long inside one culinary tradition that anything outside of it does not register as food so much as it registers as a mistake. Then comes the cappuccino incident, and honestly this one might be my personal favorite of the entire trip. Our narrator orders a cappuccino at 4 p.m. A perfectly reasonable thing to do in any country on earth, because it is her country and her afternoon and her choice. She is sitting in her own city, in a cafe she presumably likes, ordering a drink she enjoys. But this guest loses her mind over it. She does not simply raise an eyebrow or make a quiet comment. She explains, at length, with what I can only imagine was tremendous gravity and an air of great cultural authority, that Italians do not drink cappuccino after noon. The implication being that our narrator, a grown adult woman in Australia, should restructure her coffee habits around Italian cultural norms she never agreed to follow. Our narrator's response is exactly what it should be. She essentially says she drinks what she wants when she wants. And she is completely correct, both factually and spiritually. Now I want to pause here for a second and acknowledge something important. There is a version of this trip that could have been genuinely lovely. An older Italian woman visiting Australia for the first time in decades, experiencing a city that loves food and culture and variety. There is real potential for warmth and connection and beautiful meals and great stories. You can picture it easily. The guest trying something unfamiliar and finding, to her own surprise, that she loves it. Learning something about her friend's life and his wife's cooking. Laughing over language barriers. Sending pictures back to people at home. But none of that can happen when one person has already decided before she even lands that nothing outside of Italy could possibly be worth her approval. The warmth was always available. She just refused to receive it. They go grocery shopping at Kohl's. This woman finds a way to turn the pasta aisle into a classroom. She starts pointing at the shelves and correcting our narrator's pronunciation of Italian pasta names. Out loud. In the middle of the store. Unsolicited. Picture the scene for a moment. A busy Australian supermarket, fluorescent lights overhead, other shoppers moving around them, and this woman standing in the pasta aisle delivering pronunciation lessons to her host, who has lived in this country, in this city, and has shopped at this exact store many times before. I genuinely cannot imagine having the confidence to do that to someone in their own country, at their own grocery store, while they are buying food to feed you. The confidence required for that act is staggering. It is the confidence of someone who has never once stopped to ask whether their input was wanted. So after a week of restaurants she dismissed, coffee she critiqued, wine she found inferior, and an impromptu pasta pronunciation lesson in a supermarket aisle, our narrator decides to cook at home. And this feels like such a generous impulse. Think about what must be going through her head at this point. She is tired. She has spent 7 days absorbing small indignities while maintaining her composure and continuing to extend hospitality. And instead of going out again and sitting across from this woman while she makes faces at a menu, she decides to do something personal and warm. She is going to make something herself. Something she knows in her hands and in her bones. Something that comes from her own culture and her own history and the way her own family cooked when she was growing up. She is Asian. She cooks with bold spices and fish sauce and aromatics and the kind of deep layered flavors that take real skill and real knowledge to build properly. She has probably made this dish many times. It probably smells extraordinary to her, because it is hers. The guest walks in. Takes one breath. And announces that the house smells bad. Oh. Okay. So we are doing this. She does not just make a face or quietly excuse herself to another room with a headache. She does not say nothing, which would have been the minimum acceptable choice. She ignores the dish entirely, as though the hours our narrator spent preparing it simply did not happen. She turns to the husband and asks him to take her out for lasagna. Not to the person who cooked. Not to acknowledge that someone put effort and love and cultural identity into a meal. She speaks around our narrator as if she is furniture, as if she is simply not present in her own kitchen, in her own home, having just cooked food that this woman is now loudly rejecting in real time. And then, when this woman gets back from her lasagna outing, satisfied and full on someone else's dime, she has the unbelievable nerve to tell our narrator that she should learn how to cook Italian food. Because it is not good for the husband to always eat fusion food. Because online recipes are stupid for not sticking to traditional roots. She says this. In this woman's house. To this woman's face. About this woman's cooking. After rejecting this woman's meal. After making this woman feel like a stranger in the home she pays for and maintains and opens to guests. I just need to take a moment. Because I have heard a lot of audacious things while covering Reddit stories. But walking into someone's home, rejecting their meal, leaving to get your own food, coming back full and comfortable, and then lecturing the host about why she should cook differently for her own husband? That is a level of entitlement that deserves its own documentary. That is not a lapse in judgment. That is a worldview. Our narrator does not mince words. She tells this guest exactly what she is, which is arrogant and obnoxious. She tells her that Italian food is not objectively the best, because no cuisine is objectively the best, because food is personal and cultural and joyful and meant to be shared and explored and discovered, not ranked and handed down like a verdict from on high. She tells her there will be no more Italian restaurant trips, that she is welcome to shop for herself and cook for herself, and that she is very sorry but the ingredients probably will not be as good as they are in Italy, but that is what happens when you travel to a different country. You adapt. You find what is available. You are grateful for what you can find, because someone opened their home to you, and that matters more than whether the pasta is the correct shape. The guest cries. The guest leaves early. Now the husband steps in with what I think he genuinely believes is a reasonable perspective. He loves this woman, she is his old friend, and he is caught between two people he cares about. He explains that this woman is just set in her ways. That she has barely traveled. That this is only her second time leaving Italy in her entire life. He asks our narrator to apologize, just to smooth things over, just to close out the trip without more conflict. And our narrator refuses. She says it plainly. If this woman cannot exist outside her Italian bubble for just a few weeks without making everyone around her feel inadequate and foreign and lesser, then there is no point trying to win her over anyway. That is not cruelty. That is honesty, delivered after enormous patience has finally run out. I want to be very clear about where I stand on all of this, because the verdict here is not even remotely close. Our narrator is not the problem in this story. Not even slightly. She spent an entire week absorbing criticism, tolerating complaints, adjusting her plans, and extending hospitality to someone who treated every single gesture with contempt. She took this woman to restaurants. She went shopping with her. She cooked for her. And in return she received judgment, correction, dismissal, and finally an insult delivered in her own kitchen about the way her home smells. The husband's argument that this woman is old and has not traveled much deserves a proper response, because I keep seeing this logic used to excuse bad behavior and it does not hold up. Being unfamiliar with other cultures is understandable. Feeling out of your comfort zone is completely human. But none of that explains looking someone in the eye and telling them their home smells bad, or ignoring a meal someone cooked for you and walking out to get your preferred food instead, or then returning and lecturing that same person about how they should be cooking. Those are choices. Conscious, deliberate, unkind choices. Age and limited travel experience do not remove a person's ability to choose basic decency. They do not remove the ability to say thank you, or to eat quietly even when the food is unfamiliar, or to simply keep an unkind thought private rather than announcing it loudly in someone else's kitchen. And the apology request from the husband is where this story takes a turn that bothers me almost as much as the guest's behavior. He is asking our narrator to apologize for having a limit. For finally saying out loud what had been building for an entire week of small cruelties and corrections and dismissals. She did not throw anything. She did not scream. She told the truth. She said this behavior is arrogant, this treatment is not acceptable, and these are the consequences. That is not cruelty. That is self-respect. Asking her to apologize for that is asking her to absorb one more indignity and pretend it was fine, to smooth over his discomfort at the cost of her dignity. She was right to refuse. The final line of our narrator's account is the one that lands hardest for me. She says if this woman cannot survive outside her Italian heritage for just a few weeks, then there is no point trying to convince her to like me anyway. And that is not bitterness. That is clarity. You cannot build a genuine connection with someone who has already decided before they arrive that everything about your world is inferior. The verdict is simple. She is not the problem. She is the person who finally stopped pretending otherwise. I told my friend exactly why I would never date him and apparently that made me the villain. He sat across from her at lunch, cleared his throat, and explained that he did not understand why she was dating her boyfriend when he, obviously, was the better choice. He had liked her first. He was taller. He was more successful. He had been waiting. And he genuinely seemed to believe that this argument would work. It did not work. Let me paint the full picture for you before we get into what happened next, because this story has layers and every single one of them is worth examining. Our narrator is 21 years old. She has been friends with this guy, who she calls Mark, for 10 years. 10 years. Since she was 11 years old. Mark is 23. And somewhere in the course of that decade of friendship, Mark developed feelings for her. That is not unusual. That happens. Feelings in long friendships are a completely normal and human thing. What is not normal is what Mark did with those feelings, which was apparently nothing for years and years, and then one day he invited her to lunch with the explicit intention of explaining to her why she should leave her current boyfriend and choose him instead. Think about what that decision required of him. He had to sit with this plan. He had to decide it was a good idea. He had to pick a restaurant, probably, or at least a time and a place, and he had to walk in there believing that what he was about to say made sense. That level of confidence, disconnected entirely from reality, is something worth paying attention to before we even get to what he actually said. She shows up to lunch. They eat. They chat. And then Mark gets serious and lays it all out. He liked her first. He met her first. He is, in his own assessment, more attractive than her boyfriend. He knows her better. He is taller. He is more successful. And he has been around, waiting, this entire time. Picture her sitting there, fork probably still in her hand, watching her friend of 10 years deliver what he clearly rehearsed as a winning argument. I want to linger on this list for a moment because it is genuinely revealing. Every single item on it is about Mark. His feelings. His qualities. His waiting. His timeline. There is not a single item on that list about her, what she wants, what makes her happy, what she actually values in a relationship. The entire argument is constructed from his perspective and his alone. He did not ask what she needed. He did not ask what was missing from her life. He showed up with a resume and expected her to be impressed. She asks him if he wants her to be honest. He says yes. And she is. She tells him she would never want to date him, and then she explains exactly why. She has watched the way he treats women in his life. He ghosts his girlfriends whenever he feels like it and then just expects them to be waiting when he decides to come back. She calls him immature and irresponsible. She tells him that dating him would be exhausting. And then she adds something that I think is the most important thing she says in that entire lunch. She tells him that his behavior toward the women in his life is actually why she has been slowly putting distance between them as friends over time. She was not pulling away because she was confused about her feelings. She was pulling away because she did not like who she was watching him be. This was not a snap judgment delivered in the heat of a hard moment. This was something she had been sitting with quietly, over time, watching and noticing and privately deciding what it meant for the friendship she wanted to maintain. That takes a particular kind of emotional self-awareness, to recognize that someone's character is changing the way you feel about them, and to name it clearly when finally asked. Mark goes quiet. He excuses himself. He leaves. That evening, their mutual friends start reaching out. Mark has been a wreck all day. He is drinking. He will not tell anyone what happened. And when she explains it to them, their response is that she was harsh. That she broke him. That is the moment this story shifts from being about a confession to being about something else entirely. Because suddenly the conversation is no longer about what Mark said or why he said it. It is about how she responded. The original incident, the audacity of that prepared argument, gets completely skipped over in favor of examining whether her honesty was too sharp. And that reframing is worth calling out directly. Let me say something about the phrase "she broke him," because it is doing a lot of work in this story and none of it is honest. Mark is a grown 23-year-old man who sat down across from his friend of 10 years, delivered a prepared argument for why she should date him instead of her boyfriend, and then asked for her honesty. She gave him her honesty. The fact that the honesty was not what he wanted to hear does not mean she did something wrong. He invited the conversation. He set the terms. He said yes when she asked if he wanted the truth. What she said was not cruel. It was not a personal attack designed to wound him. It was an explanation grounded in specific observations about real behavior that she had witnessed over years of genuine friendship. There is a meaningful difference between cruelty and clarity, and the people calling her harsh seem to be struggling to locate that line. The friends calling her out deserve some scrutiny too. Because think about what the alternative looks like. What would a kinder response have been? Should she have gently said she did not feel that way and left out the reasons why? And then what? Mark goes home still believing he is the obviously superior choice, still treating women the way he has always treated them, still waiting around for the next opportunity to make his case. He carries that unchallenged self-image forward into every future relationship, every future lunch, every future conversation where he once again lists his qualities like a man submitting an application. The truth she gave him is the only version of this conversation that actually had any potential to change anything. Whether he chooses to hear it is entirely up to him. The detail about his success compared to her boyfriend's is one I do not want to skip past, because it speaks directly to the kind of self-image Mark has built. He describes himself as more successful. But our narrator notes that her boyfriend actually works for what he has, while Mark's entire life is funded by his parents. He has never had to build anything, never had to struggle for the version of himself he presents to the world, and yet he walked into that lunch positioning himself as the stronger, more capable option. That gap between how Mark sees himself and what is actually true is not a small detail. It is the thread that runs through every part of this story. He waited. He is better. He deserves this. None of it is examined. None of it is questioned. It is just declared, with confidence, as if the declaration alone should be enough to move her. As if she is a problem to be solved rather than a person with her own interior life and her own reasons. She went home and got on with her day. That detail matters more than it might seem. She did not spiral. She did not second-guess herself. She did not spend the evening anxiously refreshing her phone to see if Mark was okay or quietly composing apologies she did not owe anyone. She sat with the conversation, decided she had said what needed to be said, and moved forward. That is not the behavior of someone who broke a person. That is the behavior of someone who finally closed a door that should have been addressed a long time ago. She is not the villain of this story. She is the only person in it who actually told the truth. Mark had 10 years to be the person he claimed to be in that lunch. 10 years to show up differently, to treat the women in his life with consistency and respect, to be the kind of person worth considering. He did not do those things. He did the opposite. And then he sat across from her and asked her to choose him based on stats like height and arrival order, as if love is a ticket queue and he has been standing in line the longest. The mutual friends calling her harsh, and the ones saying she broke him, are asking her to carry responsibility for his emotional state after a conversation he initiated on his own terms. That is not her job. She does not owe him a softer version of the truth simply because the truth was hard to hear. If anything, the years of friendship she gave him, the decade of being present and loyal even as she quietly pulled back, that was generosity. What she said at lunch was clarity. And clarity, even when it hurts, is not cruelty. The verdict here is clean and I mean it without hesitation. She is not the problem. She is not the villain. She did not break anyone. She sat across from a man who handed her an opening, told her he wanted honesty, and then discovered that honesty has weight. The friends calling her out should take a harder look at the pattern of behavior she described, because if Mark ghosts women and expects them to wait, and then falls apart when one of them finally tells him exactly why she will not, then the problem was never with her answer. The problem is that no one told him the truth sooner. Drop a comment below and tell me which story got you more fired up. And if you are new here, a like and a subscribe would genuinely mean a lot.